So everybody says hello and hello to everyone and good afternoon. And we're here again for another expert talk of the Creative Classroom Group. And I'm very glad because we have Ian Wall and he was, he answered to my mail and he was very eager to run this webinar for us. And I think that we can learn a lot from him that we can use them in our projects in eTwinning. About film education and how we can use film, but I think that he can talk more about that and he knows more. So I give the floor to you, Ian, and thank you once again for coming.
Yeah, hold on. Trying to get my PowerPoint back up.
Please you don't need, I just want to say to the people that, or switch on the camera, that you don't need your camera. And if you put your camera on, the bandwidth is not so good. So please, you don't need your camera and your microphone at the moment. Okay, Ian.
Right. I'm trying to get, hold on. Someone is saying you are sharing my desktop and I can't get my slideshow up. So whoever's trying, there we are.
Yeah, it works now.
We're fine. Move that there for the moment and move that there. Good. Welcome everybody, and feel very privileged to be invited to give this webinar. It's the first webinar I've ever done, so if it all goes horribly wrong, please excuse me. Okay. Hold on, I'm having problems with my... Oh yes, there we go. A bit about me, first of all. My name's Ian Wall. I live in London. A long time ago, I used to be a classroom teacher at a comprehensive school in London. And I left teaching. I taught English, film, and media studies. I then went on to become Director of Education at Film Education. And in that role, I did a lot of teacher training. As you can see, I made TV programs for BBC, all about using film in education, and developed interactive learning materials, mainly based on CD-ROM, but also available online. And I'll give you details about that later on. Film Education closed last year, so I've now started a new organisation called the Film Space. Again, more about that later. So, what I want to do today is to spend the first 5 or 10 minutes talking about what's going on in Europe and what we're trying to find out about Europe, and then go on a little bit more about issues about using film in the classroom, both critically and creatively, getting you to do some work, because I don't want to talk for an hour, and then finally kind of summing up, looking at where we might go next. So, our first paradigm, and there will be a lot of paradigms during this presentation, why film and why not the media? A good question. And film has traditionally been looked at, I suppose, as an art form, and has been used within education probably since the 1920s, if not before then. Media and media literacy came along in the mid to late 70s, and is faced with a lot of issues at the moment, given that back in the 70s with media, you only talked about radio, television, film, newspapers, magazines. Now, of course, with the expansion of the internet, the different media that children can access, I think there's a debate going on as to how one should approach the media. Film is far more straightforward, and film, I think, in the EC, in the media program, or Creative Europe as it now is kind of perceived as a subset, but a very important subset. Hello, everybody.
Yes, it has on.
So, within...
For the others.
Okay, within the curriculum itself. What's in the name? Well, I've already mentioned the word film literacy. And it tends to go by film education, film studies, but probably for the purpose of this, we'll stick to film literacy because that's what the EC is using as part of its creative media organisation. Why film? Parking the media, I suppose. Well, quite often it's used to support what's being studied, but we believe that it's worth studying in its own right as I said, an art form. About and through media film is a tricky one, and I'll come back to that later. I think we're looking about how film communicates, not just what is being communicated. Far too often, film is just used as illustration about what is happening. You know, I'm going to use a feature film to show something about relationships. And what is quite often ignored is how that story is being communicated. And that's one of the key things that I want to address today. I think always there should be an examination of the relationship between the two. Why is it important that we look at film? Well, there are four kind of reasons there, I think. And I'll start at the bottom in the sense that understanding film, we believe, is essential to being literate in the 21st century. Wow, grand noises. 21st century. Similarly, using film in a creative way allows children and young people to explore ideas, to express their ideas, and to communicate with others. Going back up the screen again, we want to get young people engaged critically and debating with learners of their other ages, of their own age, not just in their own country, not just in their own school, but if we can, across Europe. And we want to just go beyond the cinema. I think when we talk about film now, we need to look at all the different platforms where film is available, all the different platforms where children and young people can find out about film. So, why do we do it? What do we do? How do we do it? Where do we start? Why study film? How does it fit into our school curricula? What do we talk about when we talk about film? What are the ideas that we want to get across? And how does practical work actually fit in with all that? That was a question that a number of us across Europe were asking ourselves. And luckily, back in 2010, 2011, the British Film Institute, the Institute of Education London and Film Education, Lithuania, were invited to research some of those questions across Europe. And back in 2012, the findings of that research were published, a European perspective on screen literacy, film literacy. And the link is there. I'll circulate the PowerPoint to everybody later on. But for the whole report on what we found out about every country across Europe, it's all in there. Of course, Europe is a country divided by its nations, and there was very little consensus as to what was important, what were the approaches and everything else. Our key problem to start with, another paradigm, is that are we talking about an entitlement to study film for everybody, pretty similar to a universal entitlement, or is it something that really is just about developing more film consumers, audiences, particularly for European film? We felt that the idea of developing audiences, of developing consumers, would actually come out of developing film literacy, although more research needs to be done on that. So what we asked 27 organisations across Europe were to answer four questions: the why, the who, the where, and the what of what film literacy meant. And I like being in Europe as well. And it's wonderful to be all across Europe at the moment. Anyway, so what did we discover from our research? Why did film education take place in various settings? What people wanted to do was to develop an understanding of language and filmmaking skills, understanding film as an art form, and that, I think, is something that comes across very strongly across Europe. The sense of film being an art form, not just being a popular medium. They wanted to develop critical viewing, critical understanding, how to analyse film texts. But there was also, along with that very academic approach to film, the sense of how film can contribute to social and civic education. And there's a lovely word in the next little button point, enjoyment. But what we don't want to do when we're dealing with film literacy is to kill that enjoyment of the filmic experience. But for developing an understanding of our own national film, the stories, if you like, that we tell ourselves about ourselves, of European film, how we perceive other countries across Europe, the heritage of European film, which is vital, and also to go beyond Europe, to look at the whole cinema across the world. Further down again, developing audiences, but key to that is talking to the industry to ensure, and by industry there I mean film distribution and film exhibition, to be sure that there is the possibility to consume European film. I know here in England, it's at times, if you're not living in London, impossible to get access at the cinema to anything beyond kind of Hollywood blockbusters. But that's, yeah. Oh my God, whenever I do that, that happens. There we go. But we also don't want to kill that pleasure that exists in popular cinema. We're not saying Hollywood is bad. What we're saying is that one of our tasks is to take children beyond the blockbuster, if you like. Who delivers it? Why is that important? Well, it isn't just teachers in a classroom, but one of the key problems that we found, and this is the same in every country, is how do we train teachers to develop an understanding of how to teach film within a classroom. The second thing that we discovered, who receives it, is that quite often it's a very, very, very small percentage of children in formal education who get access to any sort of teaching about film literacy. Outside of school, in informal school settings, that number diminishes to 0.00 something or other. It's minute. So if you like, if we're talking about that this should be a universal entitlement, at the moment we're failing. Where does it happen? Goes back to the previous point. It does happen in the curriculum, in the school day. In very few countries, it's a very specific subject that children quite often opt to study. It isn't compulsory. Similarly, in most countries in Europe, there is some use of film in other subjects, be it modern foreign languages, be it history, in the case of the UK, within English teaching. Quite often there are after-school film clubs. What teaching goes on within those clubs is variable quite often, or not quite often, but sometimes simply the children go along after school, watch a film, and then go home. In other countries, it's far more organised. There's discussion about what they've watched and follow-up activities. And then after that, beyond school, is the idea of kind of evening classes, Saturday classes, summer schools, summer camps, where children will go quite, and mainly those are focused on filmmaking. And finally, what is it? What we did discover is that if there is a national strategy for the use of film in education, for film literacy, then its ability to spread across the curriculum are easy. One thing there isn't agreement on is what should be within film literacy, what should children do, and lastly, there are big differences about when it does appear in the curriculum, what actually is studied. Again, there's more detail about that in the downloadable document that I quoted earlier. This then is what we assume, or what is in the document, as a European definition of what we mean by film literacy. You can read that, the level of understanding of a film, the ability to be conscious and curious in the choice of films. And that's an important thing, is developing children and young people's curiosity about finding out about other types of film. To be able to critically watch a film and analyse its content, cinematography and technical aspects. And most importantly, the ability to manipulate its language, technical resources in creative moving production. So what we've got are our 3 C's: critical practice, creative process, and all of that joining together to give a cultural perspective. But those 3 C's excuse me, do throw up a number of other paradigms, and getting the balance in these paradigms right is vital. There's continually an argument about should they be watching, should they be making, or should they be doing both? Is it just critical work, or is it just creative work? Does one work without the other? And actually, what do we mean by cultural? There's the getting the balance right between where film literacy and film education falls. Should it just be in the formal education strand, where actually we've got all children in the country should be in a classroom at some point or other? So formal gives us a better way of getting into that universal entitlement. The informal aspect, part of the problem with that, is a limited access. It's almost opting in. The children who are already interested will probably take part in formal, informal, or beyond the school activity. Develop engagement with film literacy. Are we talking about popular film, or are we talking about art film? Are we talking about cultural film? Or is there a way of merging the two and using the two together? Are we looking at a canon of great films? And I know years ago I was involved in a European project where we were trying to draw up a canon of European films. And it was a bloodbath. I mean, we were shouting at each other that this was a better film than that. Just trying to come up with a list of 10 grand European titles was quite fun, but no agreement was ever reached. Or should it be based on concepts about narrative, about representation? Which should it be? Again, that debate goes on. Should we be just teaching children things, telling children that this is a great film, or should we be developing their critical ability, their critical autonomy, to get them to question film so that they can then apply those questions to any film that they want? We come back again to that thorny problem. Is it about teaching about film or teaching through film? To most of us, the two should go together. You can't teach through film without teaching about it. When it comes to filmmaking, are we just simply teaching them filmmaking skills, how to operate a camera, how to operate an edit suite? Or are we talking about creativity? Are we talking about using that technology in order to actually communicate ideas? And I'll come back to that one later on. And finally, it's getting the balance right about film-specific outcomes, them as creators, them as consumers, or is it about social outcomes? Quite often when you talk about practical work, filmmaking, people justify it by saying it gives them the ability to work with other children, it gives them social skills, they're able to discuss decisions. They're all very important, but they're very, if you like, social. And I think within creative work, more work needs to be done about looking at what we want them to learn creatively, and not just socially. And because that raises the complete issue about being literate. And I'm starting to throw out, well, I'm asking lots of questions, because these are questions that are kind of current. What do we mean by being film literate? What skills, and I put that word skills in inverted commas, are we looking to develop if we're getting children to look at films, talk about films, make films? What are the overall outcomes that we're looking for? What's the kind of final goal of film literacy and film education? And implied in that is what is the learning journey, a word I hate, we'll use it, the learning journey that we want to construct in order to achieve those outcomes. Some of the things we might want to talk about when we're talking about being literate, what do we mean? Making meaning from texts, understanding, enjoying, assimilating, questioning, finding answers, thinking, discussing. Is there a right answer? Probably not. What are the answers? What are their merits? Reflecting on how they're constructed. How does a film convey its meaning? We're back again to being able to produce texts, thinking about issues of genre and style, who we're working, who we're trying to communicate with, what's the purpose of what we're trying to do, and where will it be seen. Think about how different texts work so that we can develop ourselves as producers of texts. I think quite often when you start talking to young people and they want to make a film, what they come up with is almost a description quite often of what I would always call a radio play almost, or a short story. They're not thinking filmically. So they need to think how film works. And finally, and this I think is vital, is coming to that kind of sense of selection. Why this and why not something else? You infer, you deduce to think, not just when you're looking at a film, critically interpreting it, but also when you're going out and making a film. So, and you'll be doing something in it, hurrah, hurrah. This quite often means looking at relationships between texts, between the written text and the image text, and within a creative classroom, using one literacy to help develop another. Quite often, young people will find it easier to engage with a filmic text where you can then move across and start looking at a written text. To start with a filmic text, for example, and then to move on to other historical sources of valuable things to do. And finally, well, not finally, but developing an aesthetic, developing a visual aesthetic, a visual understanding, and a visual creativity, which is what, if you like, film is about, as well as bringing in issues about sound and how visually it does communicate. And again, starting there, using a medium which students are familiar with. And now, of course, we have to deal with digital literacy. Every computer comes with its own edit suite, clear charge, normally the ability to record sound. So we're looking at image manipulation. We're looking at how they can construct a story, be it with a camera, be it with a mobile phone, be it with an iPad, whatever. We're looking at how texts refer to each other. And finally, it's that ability to create a text that we can all do, really, I suppose, in this day and age. But our argument would always be that the first thing we need to do is ask questions. We need to ask questions about text. And here we're going to try to get a bit creative. I'm going to show you the opening minute, I think it is, of a Wallace and Gromit film. That's an Aardman animation. This is where I hope this works. And it's about Wallace and his dog Gromit. And this is the opening sequence from a film called The Close Shave. The reason I've chosen it is there's absolutely no dialogue in it, so that makes life very easy. So let's just watch this. Okay, I hope everybody was able to see that. Right. Now, you're going to do some work. Hurrah. What I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to show again, and using our chat room, love Sean, excellent. What I'm going to ask you to do is watch it again, and then I'll give you a couple of minutes, and I would like you to think of 3 questions that you might ask a group of 11-year-olds, say, 9, 10, 11, or just 3 questions that you would ask about this clip. Has everyone got that? Yes. Right, fine. Let's see what we come up with. And then when you've got your 3 questions, can you type them in to the chat room, please? Okay, here we go. Watch it again. Okay. Okay. See what's coming in. All right. Okay. Ooh, I like that one. Oops. Oh, good one. Oh, yes. Keep them coming. Give me 1 more minute. I'm going to stop you there. I've grouped. Right, hold on. That I'm going to put up. Ooh. One more. Right. I'm going to stop there. I've divided those into 3 areas. And these ones here, I would say, are basically about the story. And those are questions that could be asked about any story, not just a filmic story. On this one, they're becoming filmic. Oops. Actually, no, I'm going to say film-based. But here, I'm going to say that they are filmic. What do I mean by that, by filmic? Well, I'll add some more here. Actually, no, I won't. I'll ask the filmic question. So none of those questions are, shall we say, wrong. What we're trying to get students, or our students, to do is to think more about the filmic. These, if you like, are through film. What we want are far more here. So, for example, I might ask, why does the camera move in the opening shot? Why does the knife fall between the slippers? Why slippers? Do you know what slippers are? They're the comfy shoes. Let's go back to our clip, if we can. There. Right, I'm going to talk you through. Sorry, my wife just come home. Hello. Let's go back to the beginning. So I'll pause and stop. So if you like, our first thing we see is a mobile of sheep. So the whole idea of the film, as people have said, talking about close shaves and talking about Shaun the Sheep, etc. Even the image of the sheep, which is going to be, sheep is going to be a major character in the film, is raised in that very first image. But you need to think, we now need to look about editing. Why doesn't it go from there straight across to Wallace in bed? It slowly moves. Oops, sorry. Where am I? I knew it would go wrong. No, back on track. There we can ask ourselves, what are we told there? Looking at the light at the bottom, it gives a sense of it's night time. The clock itself shows us it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And even before we meet either of the 2 characters, we are shown that there is obviously a friendship there between the 2 of them by having the photo. The great thing about using something like Wallace and Gromit, it being an animation, you know that the whole world has been created. Quite often, young people think that it just so happens that it's being filmed on a street and the person's wearing what they're wearing and the lighting is the way that the lighting is. The good thing with animation is you can kind of say, look, all of this had to be created. That was put there for a purpose. What is the purpose of that being there? Oops, let's move on a little bit further. Sorry, it's far too sensitive. Now, again, if we're asking why, and that's a vitally important question, why couldn't the knife just fall onto the floor? Why have a pair of bedroom slippers there so that it falls between the two of them? How does the music change? Let's see if I can get this up without it changing. Again, we ask ourselves the question. I'm going to give up on this in a minute. We're getting there, but we need to ask, why does the music suddenly change at that point? What does that tell us about the character sleeping behind? Notice the move from that close-up, the idea of putting something right at the front of the frame. How does that show importance? And then we're introduced to groggies. The other interesting thing there is that I would want to do is to raise the issue of what colours are being used. Why is the knitting wool red? If we carry on looking at this and go on to another page, that sense of red and green. Right, I'm going to stop because it's driving me mad. But the other thing you need to raise there is the issue of point of view. Where is the camera being placed? Where do we see things happening? For example, excuse me. He gets there, turns, he looks. That's from Sean's point. Okay. Does that make sense? I think it's vitally important. Those, if you like, are the questions that we're looking at. And the key things that we need to be looking at in the construction of any film, in our analysis, is that sense of mise-en-scène. What's being put into the screen, into the frame? What are the costumes? What's the lighting? How is the set design? Where are the characters placed? What sort of shots are there? What are the sequence of the shots? And what does the sound? Sound, not just music, but also sound from the point of view of the sound effects, all of which are contained within that sequence. Right, I'm conscious of time. So those are the sorts of questions that need asking. How is it performed? How is the sequence structured? I put actor. How do we, how's the acting itself giving meaning? The overall look of the film. The whole thing about the camera, the edit, and the sound. Those are the vital areas that we should be looking at. Now, what I'm going to do, I was going to ask you to look at another piece of film there, but I won't because we are running out of time. So those, if you like, earlier when I said, is it about a canon of films or is it about a series of concepts? And those top language, narratives, representations, law, audience, institution, and values are, if you like, I think in this day and age, some of the key concepts that we need to be looking at. And those are the things, what type of things, how do we recognise it to a certain genre, and what are our expectations? You make great use there of film trailers, which are readily available on the internet, of saying, okay, how do you know that this film is a thriller, a horror, a love story, or whatever? Representations, and this is very important for us. How are we represented? How is our own country represented? Our own class, our own gender, our own race? Key questions that, and it's not just what is represented, it's also that sense of what isn't represented. And when we're talking about storytelling, we mustn't forget those basic building blocks of how to tell a story that we need to kind of instill into our students. I think we need to work on the assumption that we can use individual clips, as I've just used there, or we could use a whole film. But I think in those early moments, or short films, also very useful to use, it is that sense of making it more difficult. If we go back to our our set of questions that we were asking, moving from that left-hand question about story questions, moving further and further into the filmic. And actually getting them to realise that there is a whole lot of aspects that they need to bear in mind as they watch. You know, it isn't just what's happening, it's how it's happening, how it's being conveyed to us. And as we watch, as I was doing there, we were using freeze frame. Sometimes you can turn down the music. It's a great thing to do so that you're asking them to kind of guess what type of music it is, or the other way around. That is actually to cover up the image, and can they guess what's going on from the sound, which I think is very important when it comes to really emphasizing how important sound is. So, yes, critically creative. There are ways in which I think we can use moving image, particularly on a textual basis, so that in being creative, we can also be critical. And I want to show you very quickly is something we've developed, and that's disappeared. No, it's there. This was actually to help students in English and Shakespeare, but it demands an understanding of the text. And please come on, hurry up. Right, okay. So what we did was, goes back to that point I made earlier about the fact that a film can be other than the way we see it. So what we did was, we took a piece of Shakespearean text and we filmed it from a wide variety of angles. So I decide that for my piece of text saying, "Good morrow, Father," I want that shot. Now what do I want? I want to go close up, I think, if I've got one. Have I? Yes, I'll go straight to Friar Lawrence. And then I think, cut to him. I'm doing this very quickly, and I have to say, I've done it a lot of times before. Well, I like that shot. So what I'll then do is go back and play with that.
Good morrow, Father. And as I to see. What early tongue so sweet saluted me? Young son, it argues that this friend with head so soon to get good morrows like that. Care keeps his watch in every old man. And where care?
Yeah. Oops, no. Hopefully that gives you a kind of sense of how, sorry, I rushed through that, how you can use film to, that an exercise like that really does kind of show how films can be different. And given the number of options that students have got, if you're using an exercise like that in a classroom with, let's say, 25 students, you can actually get 25 completely different versions. I've just seen that question. Is it a website or software? It's a piece of software that you can download the whole package from the Film Spaces website. And I'll give you the website address at the very end of the kind of webinar thing. It just takes about 10 minutes to download. There's a lot of other stuff on there, not just that exercise. It moves all the way through it. Filmmaking. Excuse me. Why do we do it? Some people say it's to explore creativity. So, if you like, that was a whole lot of critical approaches. Now, to look at this, it's how do they explore their own creativity? Is it using filmmaking as a way of exploring key concepts, as we've just looked at with the Romeo and Juliet, to understand that text can be other than the way they are, and therefore you're exploring the possibilities of what a text can do. One of the problems, I think, is that quite often it's just a question, here's a camera, go out and make something, or let's have an idea, let's talk about it, let's make it. I think the approach needs to be very carefully planned. Mood boards, where you're collecting photographs or music sequences, an outline of the story, developing it into a script, and therefore developing it into a storyboard. so that in the end, when the students actually go out to film, they are prepared and know what they're looking at, thinking about how they're going to create a mise-en-scène. When they're filming, they should record the shots that they're making. They should pay a particular attention to the sound that they're recording, and they need to think very carefully about the shots that they're choosing. Because in the long run, get those right, and when you come to editing, that makes that process a whole lot easier. It won't surprise you that from my experience, the bit that they really like doing is going out with a camera. The bit they like least is actually editing, which I find sad because I've always found the editing process probably the most creative of the lot. Which, because therefore, when it comes to creative exercises, there's the issue of what I call down kit. Goes back to that skills and creativity argument. And all too often, it's kind of the aesthetics versus technology, whereas it should be the aesthetics and technology. What does the technology allow us to do? Let's get rid of the T from what we call in the UK ICT, Information and Communication Technology. And instead of that, we need to put in A for articulation. We have information, we want to communicate it. How do we use the technology to articulate that? I've got quite a long film there that we might show at the end just as a bit of fun. So to sum up, what opportunities does film offer us? Well, it engages students, we know that. What we do want, we want to offer that ability to develop a curiosity for film, to go beyond the blockbuster, to think about what other films they might want and how do we encourage that curiosity. Linked in with that, of course, is investigation, looking far more deeply into film. We want them to experiment. I think one of the problems with filmmaking too often is that we get the sense that we want them to make a whole film. They need to experiment with shots, they need to experiment with camera movement, they need to experiment with sound. And those can all be done on short 30-second little films that they can make. Exercises, just as we experiment with exercises in writing, so I think we should experiment with exercises in filmmaking. It obviously develops their ability to reason and argue, but also to reflect on ideas. We go back to the Romeo and Juliet exercise, reflect on why they chose, what they chose, and to give a good reason for that. Thus, that links us into speaking and listening, giving their arguments, listening to other people's arguments, challenging them, and as for us as teachers, we should challenge them in the questions that we ask them. Textual understanding will develop and give them skills that we think they can transfer to other texts. It's helping them become more creative. And in the long run, it's developing a multimodal, multimedia approach. It's doing digital editing, it's looking at the internet, it's looking at film, it's looking at text. Bringing all of those together, not seeing them in isolation. And that's, to me, the obvious methodology or journey or development is that one should view and understand. We need to start from looking. And then we need to think how we might construct, if we are going to make something, how we might construct what we want to do. We need to plan what we want to do. We then create what we want to do. We want to create our film. But in the end, we need to critique it. One of our princes, Prince Andrew, recently said we need to teach children to fail. I prefer it with Samuel Beckett's comment: fail, fail again, fail better. Any finished film that's there is final, is a version, and we get director's cuts and all those things. Well, there we go. It's never finished. So what next? We want to incorporate film as part of good quality teaching and learning. We want to map film across the curriculum. How can we develop its use in a variety of curriculum subjects? What training do teachers need? How are we going to deliver that? And what should the outcomes be of our teaching? It demands that we as teachers change. We need to develop new pedagogical knowledge and approaches. We need to basically get confidence in exploring film and our own confidence in using technology, which is always fun. scares me to death sometimes. And also to change our expectations of what our students will do. And what we've always found, or what we found in the UK, is by expecting more from our students, because it is film for some reason or another, they react to it and respond and really do rise to the challenge. So we're looking to develop critical autonomy, i.e. the ability to ask questions. We're looking to develop creativity. We're looking to develop the ability to perform through film, to perform in debate, to perform in Regency. And also, we're looking to develop pleasure in a wider variety of films. If you like, we're looking to engage, explore, and empower. We're looking at, to quote Goddard, a new way of thinking, teaching, and looking. So, if you want to contact me, that's my email address, ianwall@thefilmspace.org. And if you go to www.thefilmspace.org, you'll be able to download the Romeo and Juliet interactive resource. There are a number of other interactive resources up there. There are, in the advice section, quite a lot of interesting articles about using film in the curriculum, both from a curriculum and a creative way. And there are lots of study guides that you can download, PDFs. In about the next week, there will be 5 teaching packages looking at history, story, film language, modern foreign languages, and using it for primary school, developing literacy in the primary school. They will all be downloadable. There are film clips, and there are teaching approaches, and there's an introduction to how to teach it. At which point I will say thank you and pass over to any questions or debate or whatever. So I don't know how we do that next bit. Let me go back to, is it that one? Ooh. Right.
Thank you, Ian. It was really I don't know if people want to ask something. I will definitely, go and see this Romeo Juliet track. It seems really interesting.
Silence was there. Oh.
So I think you explained everything very well, and people don't have any questions.
Good. Either that or you're all still asleep. Thank you very much.
On the 11th of April, next week at 5 p.m., the theme will be competence-based teaching and learning in practice. You can apply to this webinar in the eTwinning teacher desktop. The link to the application is there. So I hope to see you in the next webinar.
Great.
Thank you all, and goodbye.
And thank you to everybody.
And thank you, Ian, for organizing this webinar for us. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, everybody.
You too.